$63. Now that probably includes a house, and if you can include that into a debt ratio, that's still a lot of money. I don't care who you are. It says that the average credit score in the U.S. is 703, which is based on the FICO score model. That means the average American has fair to good credit, not great credit, just fair to good credit. And then it says, I love this one, the median listing price of a home. And I don't think they polled Beckley, okay? In West Virginia is $166,488. I would allow my house to go for $166,000, and I'd take $488 off, wouldn't you? And then cars. Now I don't know what they're calling a small sedan. That's probably one of them you got to fold up to get into. Runs around 20 grand. A small SUV will run you about 26,000. A medium sedan would run you about 25,000. A medium SUV about 33,000, and a pickup truck, just a base model, would run you about 41,000. So it's expensive to live, especially in the society where we are at. And I don't need to tell you that, but if you don't believe it's expensive to live, just go to Walmart and buy a couple of weeks worth of groceries. And I believe this, if the cost of living keeps going any higher, Walmart might offer financing at the register for 3 payments only, who knows? And if you pay in the next 10 minutes, we'll take one off, who knows? Now, the master teacher is getting ready to start a different type of series of lessons to the student. And so I wrote this. Tonight we need to sit up, straighten up our desks, take a deep breath as our master teacher then begins to teach us about the snares primarily of finances, but it really goes even beyond that. It goes into just saying you're going to do something, and so it's beyond just the dollar amounts. And normally whenever we think about money or giving or being good stewards, it's not just finances. It really runs a gambit of all of life. And so, if we're trying to be a good friend or a good relative and we help provide a leg up for someone who needs credit, the Bible has some things to say about it. And we'll talk about some of the things as we move forward. Now let's go ahead and start dissecting the words that the master teacher uses in these 5 verses tonight. Look at verse 1. He says, my son, if thou be surety for thy friend, if thou hast stricken thy hand with a stranger. So you need to understand the word there is the word surety, and it's primarily a financial term. It means to be the security for. If we're going to stand in the place of security for something, we've put our name and our credit reliability on the block for someone else's benefit, to be security for. It means to stand in the place of barter. I thought that was an interesting term, so I did a little more research on it. And basically, if a person that has no credit standing has to make a loan, and the bank won't loan to him, and no one else will loan to him, and he ends up at Fast Freddy's someplace that if you miss a payment, they're going to take out a knee or an ankle, you understand the interest rate goes. Does West Virginia have the payday loan companies? Have you ever heard of them? More in the South, you have what they call payday loans. You can go in and basically offer your signature, and they figure out how to tap into your bank accounts. You can go in and get a loan. Problem is, their interest rate was somewhere around 85%. Yeah, now that's, so, it's a short-term loan, so I borrow $100, I got to pay back, and it don't look so bad if you pay it back within that 7 days, but if you were to take it longer than that, good night, you'd end up in jail somewhere for that. So a person that has a good credit standing in for someone else can barter, and based on obviously credit scores and so forth, possibly the lender then would give a lower interest rate. The word surety means in exchange for. And of course we understand this as being a cosigner. And so in exchange for someone's bad credit, I'm exchanging my good credit, and I'll be the co-signer for this. And then literally the word surety has the idea of mingling together. And so you take someone who doesn't quite have enough, you mingle what you have with them. And, it's kind of the law of averages. I told you those prices that I saw of a house is the median price. Now, compared to the big house out there by the toll booth with the white fence all the way around it, if you compare my house with their house, I bring the value of their house down, and they would possibly bring the value of my house out if they were the only two houses around. There would be a comparison. But does that do the one that has more any good? Probably not. Does the one down here that makes a false impression that someone with a little less might have a little bit more? And then, of course, the word surety means that you give pledges. And if you've ever closed on any kind of a loan, 7,500 pages later, you're now the proud owner of so many payments. Right? Now, we call it a co-signer, and that's kind of what the Bible's talking about here. The master teacher is instructing the student, be careful. He's not saying it's not allowed by God. What he's saying is you need to understand up front what the possibilities are in this. Now, if you want to purchase a high dollar item and you don't have the cash and you need to get a loan to purchase the item, but the credit score is too low, a lender may require then a cosigner in order to complete the loan. The lender would would actually require the borrower to have a cosigner who has a much higher or favorable kind of credit score. We all know that. So the cosigner then, he becomes the security or the surety, as the Bible would call it here, for the borrower. Basically, that person realizes, at least in theory, that he or she would be held accountable to pay the debt in case of default from the one that's trying to obtain the loan. Also, the cosigner would understand he becomes the primary barterer, perhaps getting a lower interest rate because he has such a high credit score, and then, of course, he'll take the ding somewhere else. Now, the signature of a cosigner lends his credit in exchange for the loan to be given to the one who has the lower credit worthiness. And all this we all know, right? I wrote, by co-signing, the cosigner and the low credit borrower are mingling their financial statuses together. And that will have a negative effect kind of on both, and we'll talk about that as we get a little further into the lesson on how that it can be a negative impact, not only lowering one score, but you can kind of see that it can hurt in the long run. The cosigner, especially the one that has the better credit, gives a pledge to become legally responsible if the original borrower defaults. A cosigner is actually legally liable at the time of the signing of the contracts. So in our verse, it would be assumed that it would be natural then for a cosigner that would be at least friendly with the borrower. Go back to that verse 1. My son, if thou be surety for thy friend. Now that would assume you have a knowledge of this person, right? And so you understand the situation. And again, it's not barring it. The Bible doesn't bar us from being a cosigner, but it does tell us to be careful as we go through these verses here. The master teacher, though, understands that sometimes in an effort to do things, maybe to profit, we can get caught up in a movement and we might put our financial life at risk by going in with what would be called a stranger. It says, if thou hast stricken thy hand with a stranger. Well, that makes us want to know, what does the word stricken mean? Well, the word stricken means to become equal with a stranger. Now, you already know your friend. Let's say it's a child, an adult child, or it's someone within the family. You know their situation. You know their work history. You know how they're going to react. And of course, if you cosign, the optimistic hope is they're going to pay. And there's no reason for you not to do this because of past experiences, but you also realize you're taking a thing. But to be to stricken or to shake hands or to clap, and a lot of these had to do with how business was transacted when Proverbs would have been written. It means to become equal with a stranger, and equal in the sense of you don't know enough about the stranger, you're taking a huge risk. So the master teacher is beginning to show us that there's all kinds of areas that we need to be careful in. Now he talks about the word stranger there. And it was very interesting to take that particular word in that verse and then go back to a concordance and find out what it means. It means a foreigner. Now, when VA sent me down to Bluefield to an endocrinologist, she was a German woman. She spoke 858 miles per hour, and you couldn't hardly hear her. And she had a lisp. And so you'd have to say, slow down. And she wasn't offended by it. She realized, even the nurse told us, she knows she talks too fast. I mean, it took a while. I've got a phone call I need to make tomorrow to a dear friend of mine from Fort Benning. He's on up in years. His name is Carlos Rivera. And Carlos is Puerto Rican. Him and his wife and his daughter all speak Puerto Rican in the home. And Carlos is a very quick thinker. A lot of times when he asks you something, he's already into the next sentence before you've processed it. Then you add the Puerto Rican part into it. It takes a little bit of time to where I'll understand what he says about a week from now. A foreigner. Get this, the word stranger in the Bible means this: a profane or strange person. You know, I know in recent days there's been a lot of articles about certain investing with certain companies, and there's people that have, my wife's brother is involved in what they call investing clubs. And whatever his bent is for this week, that's the companies they would go for. And a lot of times they're socially, on the cusp. They're going to be the ones making the statements about Black Lives Matter. Not that there's anything right or wrong with that. Or they, if it's a company that would do testing on animals, they are totally against that or something like that. They're socially responsible, and so they would do that. But to be profane would be something that would be totally against the will of God just for the sake of making money. Now get this, the word stranger here also carries this meaning: to commit adultery with. Now that to me took me back, and a few of the commentators mentioned that as you enter into contracts, you've literally, we've even used this term, you've made your bed with someone else. You see what I'm saying? It's not the perfect, ideal situation. So the master teacher now has begun to paint this picture. It's a gloomy picture to help the student realize how dangerous it is to stand in the place of surety for others. In James chapter 5, verse 12, let me read this to you. There's a couple of verses here. But above all things, my brethren, swear not, neither by heaven, neither by earth, neither by any other oath, but let your yea be yea and your nay be nay, lest ye fall into condemnation. Now that harkens back to a time when a man's word became his bond. I mean, if I said I'm going to do it, it'll get done. That kind of stuff. Proverbs 22:7 says, the rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. So he's teaching the master teacher's teaching us a dual lesson. Don't be the lender, because now you've got a slave to you that you might not be willing to be into that kind of relationship with, nor do you want to be a borrower and become slave to the lenders. Someone said that they bought a brand new car and had to pay payments on it, and so they go through the drive-through at the bank every week, so that the bank sees custody of the car. Here it is, this is your car, I'll get back to you when I own it, that kind of stuff. Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 2 says, thou art snared with the words of thy mouth, thou art taken with the words of thy mouth. So the master teacher has just begun, and he's teaching us about making a legal contract with friends and strangers. That's what he was talking about within in verse 1 is to sign your name, co-sign. There's legalities behind it. You can be held responsible in a court of law and that kind of stuff. And that's one thing. But now he's talking to Christians here, and primarily, and he's telling us that when we make verbal agreements, we got to be careful because these same verbal agreements can trip us up later. You know, it's a good thing to get things written down. You know, a long time ago, men would meet. They'd discuss a deal. They'd speak out the terms to each other. They'd shake hands, and it was good as gold. It was done. There was no paper written up between them. And yet the Bible is clear here that your words, you can get snared with your words, and you can be taken with the words of your mouth. That means that somebody gets advantage over you in that idea. Now, you've heard this. A man's word is his what? Bond. Of course, most people don't know what a bond is these days. Bud, do you know what a bond is? Well, okay, see, a bond. Yeah, a bond, years ago, sometimes, maybe some of you all had a job where you had to go get a bond. I remember as a teenager, I had to go to an insurance company and buy a bond to deliver newspapers. I had to buy a bond that was worth $200 because that would have been the max amount of newspapers, and it was an insurance policy that the newspaper company held in case I took all their quarters and left. And I guess they must have had some people do that. My dad actually had to help me get it. I remember that and stuff. So a man's word is his bond. That means you can count on what the man says. Now, if a man said it, it was as if it was already a done deal, and we've totally gotten away from that. So the master teaches us about entering into business with just our mouths. He's telling us to be careful. First off, he uses the word snare. You will be snared with your words. And that literally means fall into a trap. Fall into a trap. So, it's a trap. It looks better than it is. You're trapped. Now you're hung. What are you going to do? The word snared means to be entangled by. You can get tangled up to where everything gets put on hold. When Dave was telling me one time, Dave Cochran, when he was working on his own, a lot of times he would put a lot of money into restoring a vehicle or something, and they would just not be heard from. And so what he would have to do is put what they call a mechanic's lien. They could put something against the title so that if they tried to sell it, I guess Dave would get the money. He said nobody ever did it, but you understand how that entangles the whole deal? The word snared means they can twist your words. And if you've ever had someone twist your words, it's hard to get out from underneath that. I mean, if your words get twisted, you're snared. I mean, they've got you. They've been waiting for you to say a certain phrase. I mean, I don't know about you, but because of the church rolling their phone over to mine, I get a lot of these so-called scam things. A lot of times my phone will pick it up. Sometimes it doesn't. But they'll come on the line and say, "Can you hear me?" They want you to say yes. I'll say, "Huh?" If I answer them. Usually I start punching numbers and they'll hang up. But they want to twist your words to use against you. Here's another one. The word snared means to step into a noose. Have you ever done a business deal where it felt like you had a noose around your neck? Oh, I can't get out from underneath this. I'm fixing to swing. It means to be tied up. It means to be literally lured away or drawn away from other priorities. And so when the teacher is talking to the student and says, you're going to be snared, you can be snared with your words. A lot of times the words that we are hearing and we say, we've not really thought out or prayed about. Then the word taken, he uses the word taken or snared with thy mouth and taken with your words. The word taken means to catch. I got you. Here it is. Maybe even if you've signed a contract with somebody and then they didn't fulfill it and you come back on them and they'll say, yeah, but you didn't read this one line. We can bail out at any time. You should have read this beforehand. and so the same thing is there. It means to catch, as in a net, trying to catch somebody where you've got them trapped momentarily. It means to catch in a trap or to catch in a pit. Now here's another one. The word taken means to be captured because of or enslaved. So if your words and you can be taken by the words that you say, you understand that you can be enslaved by your words. You've made the agreement. Now you've got to live up to it. And then it means this. It means to be preoccupied with. Our enemy, Satan, would love for Christians to be preoccupied with so many other things that they can't serve him. I mean, man, I got this payment. The only day I can get overtime Sunday. I guess I better start working Sunday. I can't be in church. And you understand it enslaves you and it preoccupies you too. And then here's the other one. The word taken means to be frozen because of commitment. Now, I'm not talking about freezing like it is here in June because this is oddball weather. I'm talking about stopping you in your tracks. You're frozen. You can't go one way or another with your life. And so the teacher's trying to teach these things along the way. And the master teacher tells us that even our words can snare us and can take us away from doing what's right. John Gill in his commentary said this, where it says, "Thou art snared with the words of thy mouth." He says that got into a snare out of which an escape is not easy. He says it means art no longer free and thine own man, but under obligation to pay the debt if required, by the verbal agreement made and confirmed by the striking or the shaking of hands, and this before witnesses. And so you understand that a smart person, you can be taken and it's in front of witnesses. Yeah, he said that. And by the way, in the court of law, a verbal can hold consequences. When he talks about that second part of the verse, thou art taken with the words of thy mouth, he says, as in a net, and held fast therein and thereby, and cannot get loose without paying the debt. If the debtor does not, or without the leave of the creditor. Basically what he's saying, unless they let him off, he's hung. So the master teacher's teaching our lesson here, and he's teaching us not to let our mouths write a check that we cannot cash. Now, some of you might have remembered saying that a little bit differently years ago, and hopefully it doesn't bring too much to mind, but we really don't want to get into the place where we've said something that we really regret down the road. Now, basically, we can get into big trouble if our tongues get to wagging, and we got to be careful with this. Now, so what have we learned in this first two verses here? So far we've learned that we need to avoid getting into debt with our signature. That's the legal portions of it. And then we need to be careful that we don't get in over our heads with the promises that our mouth makes. Now look at verse number 3. So the teacher moves on now, the master teacher's moving on, and he says, "Do this now, my son, and deliver thyself when thou art come into the hand of thy friend. Go, humble thyself, and make sure thy friend." Now, I have lately I've been playing a lot of radio and just kind of having it in background music, and I've noticed there's a lot of commercials coming on now about getting out of timeshares. Now, I'm not against timeshares, but I don't know that much about them, but it seems like some people get into them and the prices go outrageous. They probably couldn't afford it anyways. But these lawyers are making big money on trying to cancel these contracts that people feel like they've been ensnared with. And so what the master teacher is teaching us here is that he instructs the student to get out of the legal or verbal contracts that will cause him much problems as soon as he possibly can. Again, I can't find in the Bible where there's any sin in helping somebody or being a co-signer, for instance. But you need to be careful, and here it says, get out of it as quickly as you can. Can I sign today, and how fast can you pay this back? I want this over and done with, and I don't want it to linger on for the next 55 years if we can do it in 10 or 5 or in 90 days or whatever it might be. And so he's telling the student, when you're in one of these deals, if you find yourself in where you've helped someone else, or they've helped you, or you've said something or they've said something to you, you need to get this deal done and over with as quickly as you can. He says, do this now. I mean, there's an immediate to it. And there's a lot of reasons behind this, do it now. It's so that we don't get snared. It's so that we aren't taken and get into a place where it affects us in our service to the Lord. He says, do this now. And also notice it says there, and deliver thyself. I went to the dentist one time when I was at Baptist Bible College in Springfield. The dentist was about a fourth of a mile away from the college, and he did a lot of work on the college students. And I'm in the chair, and he's looking and needed the tooth pulled, and he said, before I start, can I ask you a question? And I said, sure. And he goes, how are you going to pay for this today? And I said, well, I guess if you'll take cash, your secretary told me it would be this amount of money. It wasn't that high back then. And I said, why'd you ask me that? He says, well, there's a student at the college. He said, I did a lot of work for him. I was trying to help him out. And he said, I've called him and asked him, when are you going to pay the bill? And he said, 2 or 3 times he's told me, you mean God hasn't paid that yet? And finally he told the guy, he said, this is what I told him. Why don't you pay me and let God pay you back? That's exactly what it says, deliver thyself. Who's going to bail you out? You got to do it. I mean, there's nobody going to bail. Listen, don't get all excited, but we've all got the stimulus money. Did I need it? Not necessarily. Did I refuse it? Not necessarily. I'm going to spend every penny of it. And they're saying there might be another one. But don't get excited about it. That's not a bailout. You know you're going to pay dearly for it down the road somewhere. Now, he says, deliver thyself. Never, ever do we ever get into a situation where we need to expect someone to bail us out. Now, the master teacher is saying that if you can clear up all the business debts that you may have entered into, as quickly as you can, the better your relationship will be with everyone around you, those that you've helped, the businesses that are out there that are legitimate. If you're out of the debt, if you're doing these short-term things, you're getting out of it, basically you'll be better off. Now, the master teacher gives instructions on literally how to get out of debt. The first thing he says, there's 2 keys here. Go, humble thyself. So there's 2 keys in one. Go. And this is something that every time we get a phone call here at church about, can you help me with my water bill? Can you help me with my electric bill? One of my first questions is why didn't you call the electric company last month? Because I know they give you at least 2, possibly 3 months before they shut you on. Unless you've had a bad reputation, they'll pull your meter a day later. But a lot of times it is, well, I thought I could make money. No, you didn't go make arrangements. You didn't go and find out what it would take. And so that's one of the keys. Never be afraid to seek assistance from the lender. I mean, if you're there and you've got problems, maybe the lender will be generous. Maybe the lender will reestablish, or just like you've seen during this pandemic now, they're allowing them to miss a few payments with no problems. And some people that have, rentals and stuff, they're letting rent slide with the hopes of getting something back down the road. Now, one may be able to make arrangements, but you've got to take immediate action. That's simple. That's one of the ways to get out of debt. And then he says, humble yourself. Humble thyself. And we need to admit when we just can't do this. And there might be good reasons why. There might be you lost a job. There might be reasons, I'm trying to get another one, but I'm having a rough spot, a rough patch here. There might be legitimate reasons, but we need to humble ourselves and admit to those that we owe, we have problems. Is there a better way? Can we work this out? And so those are 2 keys that the master teacher is teaching the student on. If you find yourself in trouble, make sure you understand that. Now, excuse me, the master teacher infers that a debt to a friend or a family member can put undue strain on that relationship. And he instructs us to make sure thy friend. What that means is to do whatever it takes to keep a clean relationship with friends. I mean, especially in the situation here, money will divide, and it can get sticky, and you want to keep that relationship clean. And let's go to verses 4 and 5 here. He says, "Give not sleep to thine eyes, nor slumber to thy eyelids. Deliver thyself as a roe from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler." Now, William MacDonald, in his commentary, I'll just put my stuff in the middle of his, but I'll say that he said this: "This matter is of such importance that you shouldn't rest until you are released from this liability." Now, that's twofold. If you're signed from somebody, you're the co-signer, you need to get out from under these as quickly as you can, and you need to be diligent about it. If you're the borrower, you need to get out of debt as quickly as you possibly can, too. Just because they offer a 45-year mortgage, it might be more advantageous to get a 20 or a 15 in the long run if you can afford it. Now, he goes on to say about this passage, you should squirm like a roe. Now, a roe is like a gazelle or one of these really fast deer-like animal from its captor. Now, those of you that have been out hunting, and you've drawn a bead down on that deer, and you shoot that bullet, and I don't know how it did it, but it jumped right out of the way. I mean, that bullet's traveling, supersonic speed, but that deer had better supersonic speed. How did I miss that thing? We used to have a video clip of a hunter that shot 3 times, and all the deer did was look up at him. He missed him all 3 times. Dude, maybe you ought to think of something else. Now, so we should squirm like a roe or a gazelle from its captor, or like a bird from the hand of the fowler. A fowler would be someone who captures or catches birds. Think about duck hunting, for instance. They're hidden in a blind. They've got the fake ducks out there on the water. Somebody's doing quack quack with his little call thing, and here comes some birds in, and they all get up and start shooting them. And some of the other birds that were behind said, I don't think I'm going to go down there now. I think I'll go around the other way. So he says, but why does the Bible warn against surety so sternly? And you could ask this question. He says, the question is, isn't it kindness to do this for a friend or neighbor? I mean, think about it. And that's how we usually look at this kind of being a co-signer or whatever. I'm being a friend here. I'm being somebody that's concerned. And again, there's no forbearance of being a co-signer. It's just saying you need to be, the Bible speaks very sternly about it. And so it might seem like kindness at the time, but it might not be kindness at all. For instance, we don't know sometimes, especially if we don't know all the facts about a person, we might be helping that person to buy something which is not God's will for him to have. I'm thinking of Nathan right now. I had a young fellow, he's now pastoring up in Plymouth Rock, Massachusetts there, and he got out of school, out of Bible college. He married right away. He married this girl, and his mom and dad pushed him to buy a house. He wasn't ready to buy a house, but he worked at a bank. And people at the bank finagled a loan for him. You ever see the movie called The Money Pit? Nathan lived in a money pit. I mean, it was every day he was putting $100 here and $100 there just to keep this house standing. And he tried to sell it for 3 years? 3 years it was on the market. And then he took a loss on the loan. And I believe with all my heart he bought the house too soon for someone that was wanting to go into ministry out away from the city where nobody wanted to live in Alabama. You think you hear banjos playing up there, you go to Alabama, the mosquitoes are playing banjos, okay? All right. Now, and so you might be helping someone buy something that's not necessarily in the will of God. Now, was it wrong to buy a house? No. Is there benefits of purchasing a home? Yes. But what we don't know sometimes, is this the will of God for this person? It also might mean this. You might be encouraging him to be a spendthrift or someone who just spends without, if I've got $10, I've got to spend 12, or a gambler. And not necessarily a gambler like you would see necessarily at a casino or something, but somebody who takes risks, undue risks with their money. And man, I don't know. I started out with a full paycheck, and I'm coming home and only got $14 left. I don't know what happened. You gamble it away in some form or fashion. Now, how about this? This is something else we have to take into consideration, and we're just about done for the night. If that person defaults, you do realize you have to pay for something that's not your own. When that happens, friendships end, and normally bitterness begins to set in. And so the teacher, the master teacher, is really giving us some good advice to consider if we decide to do something like be a cosigner or as we give our word to do certain things. The writer went on to say it would be better to give money outright if there's a legitimate need. Then sometimes that's probably some wise advice. I know I listen to Clark Howard and stuff, and a lot of times they'll call for investing advice. And they like, I think the latest hot thing is to invest in these new marijuana things, CBD and all that stuff. And he'll say, the only way I would tell you to invest in that is if you can throw that money away. Because it's not a proven thing yet. It's not something, you might get rich, but then again, you might be the one to lose every penny. So it'd be better to give money outright if there's a legitimate need. And then he says this, in any case, the Bible's telling us that we probably shouldn't become surety for someone else. Well, I'm done a little early tonight because this lesson is really going to break up into 3 segments, and I didn't want to get too far into the next one. But it's a good lesson that we need to learn, not only as from the sake of the student aspect, but it carries over into our world today. All right, let's have a few prayer requests, and just so you know, you'll be getting a letter in the next day or two. I just mailed them. It's kind of our response to the church there in Greenbrier that I think they're up to about 30 positives, 28, something like that. And I have 5 million more questions I would love to ask about that, but we're still going slow here. We're still cleaning everything we can possibly clean. We still offer masks. We're not making decisions for you, but we're also not having children's ministries. I know Libby and Cora and stuff are giving the kids papers to do, which is awfully nice, but we're not offering a lot of things, and we're going to be slow at going just to see what happens. And of course, they don't tell you a lot of stuff. How many of those people end up in the hospital, or how many of them didn't have any kind of things going on, or it can be bad. We just saw a picture. We've been asking prayer for Austin Gardner, who is the director of Vision Missions there in Alpharetta. They brought him outside today, and his whole family spent about 10 or 15 minutes with him outside there. And of course, the rest of Atlanta is burning down, but I guess where he's at, it's not too bad. So who knows? So do pray that we would be wise. It would be devastating if we had an outbreak or we had even one person here at our church that would contract. And God's been good to us, and so we need to give him thanks. So do pray that we would be wise as leadership here at church and as we move forward. And yet I don't want to be scared to live either. That's the balance, and it's really tough. All right, prayer request. Anybody? Yes, sir.